once tried to introduce a bill that would make crimes against LGBT people fine, hate crimes, get out of jail free card if they were found to be doing lascivious behavior. He is
douchebag.
Yeah, that's a technical term for him. Everything he's wrong on, like marijuana reform, everything. So I'm running for Congress this year.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll support my campaign. Right here. I'll be like the congresswoman of this hotel. This is my district.
Where can people donate?
Support Brianna.com. Yes.
Hi, my name is James A. Moore. You can call me Jim. I've written many novels now, about 40 of them. But before I did the novels, I did everything for White Wolf Games. Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Changeling, Mage, the whole 9 yards. Including some of the stuff for Werewolf Wild West and for the Changeling East.
My elder daughter wants to meet you.
By God, I'm here.
Sadly, she's in Atlanta, but
It's I absolutely love doing role-playing games, but at some point I said maybe it'd be cool if I was writing my own stuff. And actually, just last year, Dragon Con, they did the 25th anniversary of White Wolf, which was kind of a kick in the pants. I'm like, crap, I'm old. How did that happen?
You look 30 to me, just so you know.
Thank you.
Maybe 25. Yeah, vote Brianna.
Erin?
I'm Erin Hartshorn, and I actually have no game design experience. I'm looking at some interactive fiction, like Choice of Games right now, but I haven't done any. Most of my ideas on what makes something interesting and playable comes from playing a lot of games.
Amen to that.
Somebody's got to buy them.
Ironically, I knew a Jennifer Hartshorn, who was one of my directors down at White Wolf. She stabbed me in the hand once.
We'll come back to that. And just for the record, I'm Steve Kelner. I'm the moderator. I'm a motivational psychologist by training and management consultant by day. And I'm an amateur of game design. I've designed RPGs, LARPs, way back with the Society of Interactive Literature, rings any bells, and business simulations. But my intent is to focus on you guys. So, but just, I think I'll understand what you may be saying once in a while. Okay.
I was wondering why I felt so motivated on this panel.
It's what I do. All right. So, the first place about where to start, since this is clearly designed to be kind of a how-to panel, is where do you start? What are the components that you need to build a game?
So I want to tell people out there, making a game is so much harder than you think it is.
Oh, dear Christ, yes.
And it is a real profession, and I really wish more people understood this, that game design is a swear-to-God talent and professional subspecialty. The press all the time writes about me and says, Brianna, we're game designer. And I'm like, no, I don't want that job. That's a terrible job. I will get the capital to make the games, but game design is a very specific subspecialty. And it is, we all have ideas if we love games, right? That's why we get into this field. But actual game design, like if you ask yourself why games got so much better technically between the NES and the SNES, is because we learned a lot about gameplay science and the actual principles behind us. So maybe there are people here that can speak more to it than I can, but good game design is playtesting, it is iterative, it is being ruthless about throwing things away that don't work, and it's hard.
And it's microscopic.
Please,
That's
yes.
the thing. It's like everything has to be fun down to the molecular level. And so you mentioned the NES, and that reminds me of the Mario games. And one of the discoveries that they made in the Mario games when they simplified from the American-style 6-button games like Asteroids and things like that down to one joystick and one button, they had to make that one button interesting. And one of the ways that they did that is by making the jump variable by how long you held it down, which is super intuitive and added all sorts of dimension to the gameplay. But that came in later iterative design. But it's sort of like, instead of doing this, you do this or this. And all of a sudden, explosion happens. And so this is the sort of thing that you can't predict. You can only do it through iteration. And that's one of the things that makes it really hard, because ideas, just like in fiction, and I think we're coming to an audience with a lot of readers, having the idea for a good book is nothing like actually putting in the 1,000 hours it takes to actually write one book and then times that by 40 and you have a career like this, right? So, that's the thing. It's like, it's so small and it's so difficult and you need so much input to do it. So that's what I would add.
Well, it's an interesting challenge straight across the board. One of the things that people don't realize about role-playing games and games in general is that there's a deadline. And when I say that, for role-playing games, they go, yeah, you're a little late and we're going to get annoyed in about another month. And when you're talking about video games, they're going, well, you're late and we're going to have your family killed. Because there's millions and millions of dollars waiting for this to get done.
I can confirm that's true.
Seriously. Well, one of my friends, one of the guys that used to be one of my editors at White Wolf Games is a gentleman by the name of Richard Dansky. And Rich takes care of, well, pardon my language, goddamn near everything at Red Storm Games. He's actually their go-to Top Gun troubleshooter. So if something's not working out in France, he goes to France to fix the problems. He has stress levels that nobody could possibly understand, that he hasn't dropped of a heart attack, it never ceases to amaze me. On the other hand, he made enough money in 2 years to buy his house with cash. So it all depends on what you're doing in this world and what you're looking for in this world. Rich is easily one of the most intelligent men I've ever known, and he still has no clue what the hell's going on in gaming. And he's been doing it for 25 years in the video games. He is in charge of all of the Tom Clancy video games.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we can get down to like nitty gritty, something I really believe is if you're going to start making a game, I think you have two options. I think you can look at other games that are out there that you like and appreciate, and I think you can kind of refine those mechanics or tweak those mechanics or kind of move it a bit towards you. And even with that, you're going to need a lot of, of your own play testing. But I also think that I'm a big believer in our studio of the process of iterative design. And what I mean by that is, people don't know this, but games look like garbage until like a week before. It's so true. Like you'll have interfaces that you drew on a napkin and just scan into the game. So iterative design, like you can do it with PowerPoint presentations. You can do it with I've hacked it together like with Flash. And the idea is not for it to be really playable, is to get the nuts and bolts there to go like, is this fun? Does this work? And then you put it in front of people and just hand it to them and see if they can figure it out on their own. And you have to keep your mouth shut, and that's so hard for me. But I really do believe that kind of iterative design, that is the difference in a good game and a great game. So,
I think you raised two different points here, though, that I want to make sure I separate.
Yeah.
One is, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time out, which is true of any creative endeavor. Only the last draft matters. Two is that you have to assume it's going to suck at some point, and the only way you can fix that is by testing it. And with games, you have an audience to do it. With writers, you have people who go do writers' workshops. But it's like there is no designing the perfect game out of the box.
No. You're out to find the fun. I mean, and so, I think it's a great idea to take something that exists and just try to refine a little bit to see if you can make it more fun, because a lot of times we'll play a game and say like, they should have done this little thing, and then you make that game and you discover, first of all, why they didn't do that thing, and you're an idiot for even proposing it, but then 6 months later you might figure out why. The other thing I want to build on too is almost all games, pretty much all games start as paper, even if they're video games. They start on paper, and you only add difficulty of medium as you need it. So if you're making a video game at some point, if it's a real-time game, you're going to have to make a Flash prototype or something, because you have to see things in action, and that's a calculus problem that's hard to duplicate on paper. But almost all games that I've seen, whether video or whatever, have started with very simple elements. I'm part of the Board Game Designers Forum in New York City, and so we have a lot of professionals, people from NYU and the New School who come in, and sometimes they have made the updates to their prototypes, on pieces of paper that they were tearing up on the subway there, because as they were, looking over last week's notes or whatever, that's the time that you do it. And then you just throw it in front of people and you find the fun. And it is very interesting to think about how little you know about fun. How little you know about what it is that actually, will set the chemicals in your brains going off. And that's where the magic happens and the numinous quality is discovered.
I'm just sitting here learning.
mean, what do you like about a game? And what makes it fun? I mean, it's fine and good to talk about magic, but I think people here want to figure out, well, how do you make the magic happen, right? What are the spells?
I have a really good example of this, actually. So for our last game that we brought out, Carolyn Van Esseltine, I think she's here this weekend. You know, she sat down and we programmed this this sub-menu into our battle engine, and we give you all these questions after every single fight you went through. Like, well, did you feel like the enemy health was too high or too low? You know, was the fight too long? Like, how did you feel about A, B, or C? What would you rate it? And you said at the very beginning of this that game design was a very micromanaging process, and it is. It's all spreadsheets, and people don't know that because you were literally getting playtesting data, and then you would go into the Excel spreadsheet, and then you change your variables. You change health, you change recovery time, you change stun lock, and then you put it out for another playtesting cohort. That is how you make a good game, and it is so boring to do.
That is absolutely true, by the way, in role-playing games. Well, one of my favorite examples of that was I had a group of victims that I called the troop that I played with, where I got to basically destroy their lives regularly while I was testing my games.
For fun and profit.
Absolutely. So I've come up with this idea, and we're just going to rip your little souls out and stomp on them for a while. And I played one of the games that White Wolf had actually set up, and it was Diablo in Mexico. Statistically speaking, if you played this game and you tried to kill off the bad guy and drain all of his power, you were going to die a horrible, horrible death. That's all there is to it. It was designed so that you could not possibly survive this. This was the idea of just a delightful time. And then a roll of the dice. And the big bad guy who should have been impossible to destroy botched the roll and died horribly and was sucked up by all of the people. And Andrew Greenberg was the developer at the time, and I told Andrew what happened, and he went, "What the hell did you do?" I said, "I followed the rules." She said, "Don't follow the rules. Build them." And I explained what had happened, and he changed the rules for the game for the next edition. What happened basically was he botched it, and a nobody basically mind controlled the big bad guy who's waking up and said, "Go back to sleep," and he went back to sleep and they drank him. Sucked all the blood and the soul right out of the dude. And he said, "Well, from now on, that's never going to happen. From now on, unless you have a higher rank than this guy, you can't use that power on him anymore because I said so." And he put it in the rules, and there it was. And this is playtesting. In this case, the book had actually come out, and he was reading this.
For those of us who have old AD&D players, and we'd get stuff out of the dragon, you'd realize this stuff is really not playtested. And one of my favorite examples was actually cantrips.
Yes.
Where it was basically a quarter of a first level spell, and there were things like lighting a candle on fire, just useful things for around the house. I had players use nothing but cantrips and annihilate high-level characters. I'll put flame on his eyes. You know, I'll put clean up the dust and throw it in his nose. You know, I mean, I'll change his clothes so he's now wearing something that's very binding. You know what I mean?
I have summoned rats, and he's covered with food, so.
Yeah.
But yet this really hits the problem that when you are making a video game, you were sitting there and you're looking at code for 40 hours a week, you're working on textures, you're working on game mechanics, and you really get to the point where you cannot see the forest for the trees. You have no idea how people are going to perceive it because you're playing it and you're thinking, okay, my frames are 4 seconds there, I've got to interpolate this animation differently, I need more memory there. You were thinking about all this high-level stuff, and you can't ever know how they're going to perceive it. So you have to throw it in front of an audience because they have this fresh eye that you utterly lose while you're looking.
So let's talk about that. I mean, you always start with something though that you expect is fun before you get lost in the trees.
Yep.
What are the kind of things you try to get a person to experience?
So you do it for yourself. So writers always say, "No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader." It's a good maxim to live by, and it's kind of the same thing. And so you should be thinking about what you want to experience in a game that's sort of like missing from the universe right now. And actually, I'm glad that you two are sort of like opposite of each other because when you're talking about role playing, you're talking about changing rules on the fly, a play experience.
There's a moderator who manages the process.
Yeah, like
right?
somebody who basically adjudicates the rules. And when you have a justiciar, you don't need an AI in the same kind of way. Whereas your system has to be prepackaged and done to the nth degree, or at least as much as you can afford, right? And so that's where, it's a very different type of design, even in philosophy, And so when I make games for the classroom, for instance, I know I'm going to be there and I can be an adjudicator, and that lets me not make video games for the classroom because it's prohibitively expensive and it might not function even the best of circumstances. So I tend to do paper things in the classroom. So I think where you start is you say, here are things that I think would be really enjoyable in the setting. Here's the thing I want to
For example?
For example, this game is because I am addicted to hot peppers. I love hot peppers. I embarrassed myself in San Antonio, Texas by trying to eat the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse burger and failing. Those of you who've seen Man vs. Food, they cheated now. It used to be 3 butchalokias, now it's 6, and it's drenched in habanero pepper sauce that crawls down your throat and closes it before you.
So this is the fun?
The fun is
Endorphin rush.
Yeah.
Having your throat try to burn itself
the
out.
fun here is pressing your luck. And so when I tried to make the game at first, I was like, oh, you want to keep yourself balanced so you don't burn. But balance isn't fun when you're eating peppers. Ultimate destruction is schadenfreude, and that's what's fun.
So it's just like a going to the brinksmanship sort of game, except
Exactly.
you're testing yourself and seeing if you can force someone else over the edge?
Yeah, exactly. You're sort of, what it is sort of like, if you explode in a blaze of glory, that's worth points. But if you explode too soon, you're out before you can do it. So it's like knowing when to destroy yourself.
This reminds me of the game Nuclear War, where the idea is to be the last one to blow everything
Right,
up.
yeah, it's kind of the same thing.
You need to have a sneeze card in there, by the way, so they can sneeze the pepper into their nose.
And blow up their brains.
Because I saw somebody do that once, and it was freaking hilarious.
On your side.
He wasn't laughing, I was laughing.
Right, they were nice to you. You were cracking it.
Okay, so that's
I
appeal.
think good games have a good mix of risk and reward. I think that is a really essential component of a game. But I also think, and I think this really applies to board games, like all respect to those of you that like board games, a reason I find it difficult to get into is because the rules are generally very Byzantine and impenetrable. And I think that
Monopoly?
Monopoly would be accessible, I would say. But I think a really good element of really well-designed games is if someone can pick it up and play it, I think you've succeeded as a part of game design. If someone is having to go to an FAQ or read another site to figure out how to play a game, I think that's a very niche product, and I think you failed as a game designer unless it's something like Dark Souls, where the entire point of it is designed.
No, well, let's refer to our player on it.
So something like Flux, by your definition, is an absolutely perfect game.
I don't even know what it is.
Flux is this card game where basically
Andy
the
Wood.
rules are you draw a card, you play a card.
And the rules are all.
And if somebody wants to join in the middle of a hand, they sit down, they draw a card, and they play.
Erin?
I would say, I'm talking about the video game industry.
Right.
Okay.
The video game industry is dominated by older white men, and it's people that have grown up with. They're very comfortable with the button, with the joystick with 2 sticks and 12 buttons on it.
Right.
I think very often we have a game design problem where you're assuming people know how to do this, and I know how to play that, but a lot of
My
You know how to
family
drive Harley,
finally
right?
taught me how to use an Xbox controller this last year.
Well, more people play casual games
Right.
than anything else.
Right.
And most of that audience is female. Right?
It's close. It's close.
Close.
Yeah.
I play casual.
Majority.
But Diablo 3 is good because it
Diablo 3, yes.
slowly adds in which buttons you're using as you go through.
Diablo 3 is I would call this not perfect, but close to perfect game design. Because at its core, Diablo 3 is about clicking to kill stuff, right? But then we learn how to pull these different weapon slots, and there's a lot of accessibility there.
But
There's a high
it's so
level-
slow that you go through
Exactly.
and add the buttons that you
Exactly.
learn it. And
So let's lay this down as a general principle.
Right.
It should be accessible at least to start with, and either stays accessible or it teaches you At a reasonable pace.
Yeah. Except when it doesn't. And so just like the art world,
All right.
as soon as you make, a rule, the exceptions flood in. And I'm thinking of the gorgeous ugliness of Dwarf Fortress, for instance. And Dwarf Fortress is an ASCII game, an ASCII game, and it is maybe the most complicated simulation ever created, but it is so complicated that basically what you're doing is you have a kingdom of dwarves who will do just about everything you can imagine to fuck up their lives. Forgive my language. This is the nice night, isn't it?
My daughter's right there.
Sorry.
We have a psychologist here in the building.
Dwarf Fortress is so complicated because it's so graphically light that it allows things, for instance, for a king to be cursed by the thing that he wanted to do. And so, like, I was reading online on Reddit about this dwarven king who was immune to fire. But he wasn't immune to pain, which is a different stat in the game. And so he caught fire and just stayed on fire for like 500 years, went insane, and wrecked his entire kingdom as he ran all around it, spot by spot, and set the whole mountain ablaze. That kind of gorgeousness isn't possible in Diablo 3, And so that's where it's sort of like and Diablo 3 is a good game too. It's not that it's not. It's more like Dwarven Fortress is absolutely a niche work of art that not a lot of people can play, but it creates these sort of opportunities that don't exist in any other
So now we're talking about the idea of rules versus flexibility, and we've come up with that in terms of role-playing games where you could have a somewhat infinite possibility to play.
Oh dear God, yes.
Yeah. So I'm sure we can tell stories.
I'll throw a couple your way. First off, the best rule that ever came out of White Wolf games was the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule said, whatever rules exist, the storyteller, the guy in charge of the game, can supersede them. Lovely concept. Ended every argument the same. I'm a rules nut, so I'm going to pull out the 17 books that say, and you go, nope. Golden Rule, screw you. I'm in charge.
Although I've seen that badly abused by incompetent game masters who were too stupid to come up with a game worth playing.
Which is true. One of the problems with variables is no matter how many variables you have, and they want you to limit it to the most common variables on a role-playing game, somebody will come up with something that is completely, impossibly stupid. I did that in Champions when I had a character haul off and kiss another character in the middle of a fight.
Oh yeah.
And of course the character freaked out, and that's when everybody else dogpiled on me and beat the crap out of the bad guy. And looked at my character a little funny afterwards, but hey, it worked.
My wife, by the way, was a master of completely throwing me off in the game because she was brilliant. She would come up with a solution no one else would have thought of, and you did slap yourself. But I enjoyed that because what an RPG is about is the mutual creation of a story.
Exactly.
And that's not something. It's more you're doing a little of that with the good video games.
Well, the video games, good rule sets encourage you to find the edges of it, right? Like
which is kind of what you're talking about too.
Like Grand Theft Auto. This is a game I would say is a really good example of this because it kind of encourages you to go out and see what kind of violence you can get away with.
Horrible things.
I don't play this game. I don't play this game. It's a good example of finding the edges.
It's a great. Travis Williams was one of the designers on the original Grand Theft Auto, and he also used to work at White Wolf Games. And he said to several people at the convention, don't let your kids play this.
Yeah.
And this was on the first edition. They said, why not? I said, because I've designed a game for you where when you've had a bad day at work, you can cut loose with some road rage and do horrible things to horrible people. You don't want your kid playing this. And later editions were, hey, why don't you just slap that whore around for a while?
But you were saying, so where are the edges of the game of that game for you? I mean,
I'm saying this is a good principle of game design. It's finding out what rules you can get away with, like how far you can push different principles, and maybe it's, Frog Fractions is a really good example of a game that kind of subverts your expectations. So this is a game that it starts off and you're just shooting your tongue in the air and trying to do some math problems. It turns out to just be this completely ridiculous esoteric story. You have to figure out that your frog needs to go in the pond and go under the water. And the moment where you figure that out and do it and go through this completely weird narrative is the reason it won so many game designs. So, it's finding that edge is very important.
I knew someone who played Han Solo Asteroids. He would dodge as long as he could.
Right.
And, that was sort of a totally different game. And it was hard, but it was a very different game than the one that was designed.
One of my co-authors and friends actually has been playing Lord of the Rings
MMOs since it came out. And one of the things he's discovered is if you turn your character just the right way and move them sideways, you can go into areas of the game that don't exist yet.
Yeah, see.
It's a bounding box error.
Yeah.
Those are easy.
And-
Those are hard to find.
He just has fun doing screen caps every time he goes to an area that shouldn't exist.
Right.
It's a bounding box. Sorry.
Incompetent.
I can't go.
Yeah.
So Erin, do you like playing at the edges of games? Or do you like playing in the middle?
I don't know. I think I tend more towards the middle.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, sorry. I mean, there's somebody who said if there's no good middle, there's no point in having a great edge.
Right.
I mean, you know, but that's just saying the obvious.
With role-playing games, there's always that one player who has to try to find a way to throw a monkey wrench in there.
Yeah. The question is whether they're doing it maliciously or with style.
Oh, with style, 9 times out of 10. But, you know, in the middle of the great combat, I'm going to tickle him.
Yeah.
Well, shit. It doesn't say if the character's ticklish.
Roll.
It's exactly
Yeah,
what I rolled it. Congratulations, he's ticklish.
But this is where we come to the risk and reward point too, and the idea that there's a chance that the impossible can happen is, I think, is what motivates people.
Right.
So, but the question is, what kind of game is there? Why do people gamble when the odds are so high against them? And actually, I do have an answer to that because I'm a psychologist.
Well,
High risk, high reward is appealing to certain people. Maximizing performance is something that different people like, and I think it explains why there are different games for different people.
Well, it's different roles, right? Like an utterly legitimate play style is what we call glass cannon, where you like min-max your offensiveness and then leave your defense at minimum, and then you play through a game and you're killing everything in sight, but one hit is going to kill you. That is a valid play style.
Absolutely.
Another valid play style is to kind of balance your points around so you can take more hits, be more strategic. Good games allow for a variety of different players.
Right.
Bad games kind of lock you into A, B, or C. This is why Overwatch is such an interesting game design, because it does have those heroes that kind of fit that twitch, move, kill, got to mouse over to that exact pixel and hit it every time. There are characters in that game for that, but there are also roles for lower skilled players to just kind of follow people around and heal them, and that is good game design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple different things to factor out. Some games have no chance to them, right? So chess is a perfect information game, and you know exactly which moves you have. And so this is a game that doesn't rely on anything other than previous knowledge of the game and understanding the rules of the game. You know,
And being able to actually calculate possible moves, X moves out, if you're really an expert.
But calculating moves out is overrated. That's how computers do it. It's much more having a sort of like sense of like, here's where I generally want to be, and knowing this move and having a history of it is more how humans play.
It's true, conceptual analysis.
Yeah, it's more like a conceptual zeitgeist idea. So, you know, to me it's sort of like, Overwatch is actually a great example because what it does is it plays to different play styles, but all of those players have meaningful choices to make within their thing. And that meaningful choice, I think, is one of the watchwords. It's like, when you're in a position, if you don't have a meaningful choice, then you don't know what to do, or you know exactly what to do, and either of those is terrible. So in the role-playing game, for instance, part of the fun is trying to break the DM. I'm sorry, that's like that is a universal. Yeah, I mean that is part of the game, and maybe you call it metagame, I don't know, but to me it's like, I think it's just part of the game. Just trying to mess with the people in front of you, just like you know, improv actors do when they give somebody an especially hard prompt because they think it's funny, you know, and so, but that's still a meaningful choice, and to me it's sort of like, instead of being like, well, shit, it's more like, well, shit, here we go, you know, like that's the time to level up as a DM even. And
So you drew a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Now I got to draw my own line. Right through your line with a 2x4.
Yeah.
Well, then it
play
becomes,
with you.
I mean, the challenge of RPGs is, I think there is, I mean, I always play not as to kill my players. In fact, my objective is the risk-reward thing was, I wanted everyone to feel that they were in mortal peril at every minute and nobody died. And that's what happened. They pushed it as hard as they could, because the trouble with the role-playing game when you're a game master is you can kill anybody at any moment. Meteor just fell, you're dead. So the constraints are the ones you put on yourself. And so there's a phenomenon we know, sorry for dropping in the motivation again, but the balance of challenge and ability is what leads to flow experience, if you know Mahaley Csikszentmihalyi stuff.
Yeah.
It took me 4 months to learn how to pronounce that name. So, but it also is about games. When you get totally wired and you're on it, it's because of that perfect balance. It's just challenging enough to fully engage you.
Can I borrow your pen for a second? So you talked about psychology. One of the more interesting charts I saw of game design was like this. So there are different points that people play as. There are different psychological reasons that people have for play. So part of the old style where our industry started, where it was just old white dudes in our field, this get a high score. That is like a very big psychological motivator for it, which is why so many games in the 80s have that high score mechanic. That was
Well, it goes back to pinball games.
That's another. The pinballs are about figuring out the rules and figuring out creative ways to get around those.
Yeah, but you're also aiming for the high score.
So then you see, there's this other group of games down here. They're more sandbox,
She's
like the
drawing
Sims.
just
Yes.
a map and
So,
saying different
like
points.
the Sims, this is all about the creativity. This is not about getting to any particular place. This is about the journey here. So what you find here is there's psychological overlap where generally speaking, guys like these games, generally speaking, women like these games. And there's certainly overlap, but a really big mistake that our industry makes, because it is such a sexist field, is when this is all that's on the team.
The maximizing score.
This is all that gets represented. This is why so many video games are so hard, are so impenetrable, and are so frustrating for new people to pick up. So yeah, we have to talk about that different psychology of different people.
And the motivations, by the way, do not differ by gender, which is kind of interesting. It is sort of the style with which people are encouraged to play is part of what we're talking about. But you also seem to be talking about people who are grown up with a certain...
Sure.
So that means they already absorb all the assumptions. They know the language of certain kinds of games.
Right.
So that means it's going to be inaccessible for someone who hasn't spent 20 years learning.
Yes,
Yeah?
exactly.
Can be, yeah.
But just like fiction, yeah, or art of any kind, I suppose. But yeah.
One of the most
Oh, I'm
interesting,
sorry.
after you, by all means.
No, I just wanted to add to the point that the games are also literally sexist. Literal portrayal
Yeah.
of where
Grand Theft Auto.
just literally sexist too, which is also putting a barrier to. It's a non-entry barrier too.
Yeah.
So it's something that people like you are working on changing.
Yeah.
At great personal cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting experiments, and I do consider it an experiment that I ever saw come out of video games, was Doom. Because when Doom first came out, it was free. You could just download it and play it. It wasn't as complex as it got later on, obviously. It was a first-person shooter. But they also had patches that you could get for this. So you could download the game, and then you could download an extra part to the game, again, normally free of cost, that completely and drastically changed it. My brother-in-law went nuts for that game because his idea of a good time was killing everything. So he would set it up so that he was indestructible and had endless ammo, and he would blow the crap out of everything for 3 hours and call it a day. But
It's a legitimate approach.
then you had those patches.
There's a reason
So
God little cheats are so common.
Yeah,
one of those patches turned it into Aliens.
Right.
You literally could play the movie Aliens through Doom, and another one turned it into Barney. I gotta tell you, one of the creepiest things I've ever heard in my life is Barney in the middle of this labyrinthine maze, off in the distance going, I love you. There's no reason that should be scary, and yet, that's some creepy crap.
There was a wad of files you put in there, a little different than a patch, but the overall point, absolutely. So, yeah, I thought the way that they monetized that game was very, very interesting. It's interesting to see us kind of moving back to that in our industry with Kickstarter. It's very much this kind of crowdfunding idea for games. That's what Doom succeeded on. Is that we call it shareware.
Free to play, I think, follows a lot of the same.
Well,
lines.
and actually interesting how the apps business changed that. I mean, I used to love Freeverse. I'm a Mac guy from way back. And if you ever saw Freeverse games, they were basically freeware.
Yep.
You could pay whatever you wanted. And people paid.
Right.
And they kept going. They built some great games, Automatic, for example. And then they put out their first app for the iPhone, and they made more money from that one app in their first month than they had the entire history of the company.
Wow.
And they said, we're not going to make Mac games anymore.
Yeah.
Because you have the accessibility, being able to just do little bits and monetize it all. It was too good. They just ported over all their games.
Yeah. Well, we could get into a longer discussion about Apple's abrogation of
Or
the
that too, but
game
that's another issue.
platform. But yes, I definitely agree with them.
Okay, so We've talked about risk and reward. We've talked about accessibility. What other key things should you use to draw somebody into a game?
Graphics.
Okay.
Pretty graphics is important.
Interface, I would say interface is,
Yep, actually, that's a better way to put it.
is relevant to interface. It is so important, and UI engineers are so disrespected in our field, and they shouldn't be. That is where the real work happens. So what's really interesting about interfaces is, you know, you mentioned Dwarf Fortress, right? This is terrible interface.
The worst in the
This
world.
is bad. This is bad. But that communicates something on an artistic level to the player. It's ASCII code, so it's, you know, it's going to be very obscure. Take the opposite of that, something like Candy Crush, where every single jewel is beautifully animated, and the UI is just built in a way to just keep you flowing through this experience. So yeah, I think graphics are a very, very, very key part of game design.
One of my favorite examples of that is The Seventh Guest.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, which is, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's pretty much the first PC video game. And again, one of my friends wrote that and paid for his house in Long Island off the first royalty check. More power to him. But the graphics in this thing were spectacular. I played that game the first time. I didn't give a rat's ass about any of the things I was supposed to be doing. I just wandered around this house going 360 degrees going, look at that. That's prettier than my real house is. I'm gonna go up these stairs because damn, I can.
I was just thinking mist, yeah.
Because you know, who cares if I can't figure out the puzzle? Look at this
Exactly.
picture.
Who cares about the puzzle?
Yeah.
Look at these things I can open.
Seventh Guest also had voice, which I remember
Yes.
being revolutionary when I first played it. That gorgeous bass of that man saying, "What, you beat me?" Yeah, you know, like it was very satisfying.
I'm
stunned.
I do feel strongly, though, that our industry is very, very guilty of pursuing graphics at the expense of good gameplay. So
Yeah.
look at this last generation stuff. You know, we had the PS3, which is it's an iterative improvement on. We had the PS4, which is an iterative improvement on the PS3. We could be using that extra power for fluid simulation, for better AI, for better dialogue trees, for all of this really interesting computational stuff. And what do we waste it on? It's on particle effects, which are expensive, but that's what we do, and slightly higher texture values.
Exactly, like little triangles.
And better lighting.
I have to agree with you though, because you know some of the dialogue in these video games, I'm like, oh, for the love of God, 14 people have said the same thing to me.
Yes,
now.
yeah.
And they're using the same voice.
Well, they do that, and then they procedurally rig the mounts up so it just does this.
Right.
Yes.
They won't pay someone to key it by hand. Our industry has a huge bias towards automation, which is bad game design in my opinion, because it breaks immersion.
One of the stupidest examples that I ever saw was a version of the Monopoly. Now, I love computer game-based Monopoly, the original, the one I got from my Mac that played from Virgin Games, if you remember that.
Oh my goodness.
Because I could play a game in 5 minutes,
Right.
which is, by the way the professional players do it, because they don't waste any time, they just count the money and go. They added animated graphics, so when you roll, it goes roll, 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 stop. Let's watch the shoe move around the board. And it's like, that's not why you play the game.
Right.
Wrong. Yeah, so the graphics need to support the story.
Well, that's gonna have a function of making you feel immersed. And immersion is another technical term in games.
Okay.
It means
So
a very
hence the mist
specific
and,
thing. So I would argue that does have a point, and that does build immersion and builds the emotional connection. So I would argue that's part of gameplay, or it can be.
But I'm saying, but do you use it properly? Like say, for
It
now
sounds
Monopoly, there's no
implemented
point.
Right.
Yeah. It should
All you do is
have
slow it
options.
down.
Slows it down, yeah.
In a good board game, immersion will help keep you playing and enjoying it, even if you know you're going to lose.
Right.
So it's
Our-
pleasurable watching.
Our gaming group has a really bad track record with co-op games. I don't think we've won Pandemic once. Dead Men Tell No Tales. We will play that for hours and hours trying to beat that pirate ship. I think we've won 2 games.
I think so, and only one of those was our actual gaming group.
But it's so much fun trying to do it.
So let's flip this. We've talked about the graphics. What about the games that don't have the graphics? And I'm thinking of, say, for example, Escape from Monkey Island.
Yeah.
Crappy
Hey,
graphics.
that ain't great graphics.
Well, okay, first time I did.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Well, but even
All right, I'll take an extreme example. Anyone play Kingdom of Loathing?
Sure. Yeah.
You don't play it for the graphics. It's stick figures, literally.
You play it for the graphics, the stick figure aesthetic. See, this is the thing. Like in let's say impressionist art, they moved away from trompe l'oeil art. You know, that was supposed to be the exact thing that you were seeing in real life depicted in two-dimensional paint, and made it washier and pointillist and much more of a thing about how the eye works rather than how a thing might actually mimic another thing. And so Impressionism is probably worse graphics than 16th century trompe l'oeil art, but it was the next revolution in art. And I think now we are starting to get to the point where people can say, Monkey Island is gorgeous, you know? And I've read people writing about how much more difficult it is to create beautiful 2D art than it is to take 3D art and make it in a different way, because the expectations are different, and creating fluid animation, say for like a 2D fighter, is a completely different aesthetic that has different requirements built into it.
Okay, fair point, but I'm still going to come back to Kingdom of Loathing, which is definitely crap art.
No!
The reason why you play...
I would put that
Why do you play... Well, why do you play...
saber-tooth lime on my chest. I want that t-shirt.
But that's
There's
part
a
of
saber-tooth
it. The joke is that, yes, there's a saber-tooth line in the game, so... and it's brutal.
Yeah.
But
As it freaking should be.
But the reason why I play that game is because it's hilarious and it's written well. The people who write it are grammar and language geeks, and it shows. And that's something you don't see in video games very often.
Except when you do. I'm playing
Very
a game.
often.
I'm playing a game called Reigns right now. I just got it on my iPhone 2 days ago, and it's basically you have something like 1,300 years to kill about 60 kings to finally free your soul from the devil. And so basically you follow this timeline where all of these kings are hanged and burned at the stake and, you know, die in bacchanals with, you know, their own excess and things like that. And all in the meantime, it's this beautiful, beautiful interface, talking about elegant design.
Yeah.
The interface, it's a narrative, procedural narrative that is Tinder. Basically, you swipe left or swipe right. That is the only thing. And by
That's
swipe,
elegant.
it is,
Impressed.
but it's gorgeously done and it's hilariously done. And it's I actually think we're in a narrative renaissance right now. And I'm a reader, you know, and I'm a writer. And I think right now we are finding all sorts of really interesting narratives being discovered through things like toying, which I know you know very well, and other sorts of mediums that are becoming democratized. And so what we're learning, though, I just want to get back to the idea of interface, because to me it's very much a form follows function sort of thing, where if you make the right thing for your game, people will love it, no matter how simple it is. And so the saber-tooth lime works not only because of the writing, but because the drawing is a shitty...
It's hilariously bad in each
It's
drawing.
hilariously bad, so it works for that. And it works too in role-playing games. You know, the character sheet design is extremely important for where you're putting information, and the information flow of a character sheet is one of the things that will make or break a game. So
Well, and frankly, so is the artwork.
yeah.
You know, a perfect example of that is, I'm trying to remember the name of the system. I've been up for too many hours. Basically, it's a riff on D&D, but whereas D&D used black and white artwork that wasn't very good, these guys actually paid artists to do really good artwork.
Yeah.
And took off like a bat out of hell.
If you go to Gen Con, which I would do the writers conference, I'm going there this year, but
I think I'm going to that.
there's
but
an
I'm not sure.
amazing section of Artist Alley, and what they're doing is they're selling their art to all the people trying to design their games and getting Kickstarters going. So it's now become the point where people like, I've seen a few games where the art is magnificent and the game sucks, but boy, it's beautiful. But it's interesting to see how that kind of just pushing back and forth.
I think we're seeing this a lot in indie games, that, you know, like the perfect AAA game like Mass Effect, right? So great writing, great gameplay, great graphics, great interface. It's got everything. I think that if you're on an indie team, I think your audience will let you slide on one or two of those if the rest are really polished and it does something else really interesting. So you listed a few games with really good gameplay. That is a case where the graphics are going to be forgivable at that point, but you can't just, it's not one or the other. Like all these aspects are important.
Tell me those-
Shoot a few of them.
Tell me those four again.
Sure, it's going to be graphics, interface, it's going to be gameplay.
Writing.
And you said writing.
Writing, yeah, immersion.
Yeah.
For all those core immersion.
Yeah.
Well, I would say immersion could be a combination of the writing and
That's
the
what I'm saying, the
graphics.
technical
Yeah.
gameplay term for writing is
Ah.
immersion, and as far as game design goes.
If you can't get lost in the story, you've done something wrong.
Yeah, you failed.
Or it's a different kind of game. I mean,
yeah.
why do people play Sudoku? Right? I mean, we know we're not talking about that kind of game.
Right,
but,
well, think about an arcade
Well,
game,
maybe we are.
like Final Fight, like it's kind of a sexist game, but it's a very simple story. Jessica gets beat up, and you're going to rescue her, and you're possibly playing as the mayor, who's a shirtless wrestler. That's a story. That's
Mike Hegger.
That is an immersive story that just happens to be told in a super different way. So that immersion is very
Yeah.
high. Yeah.
One thing I found, and I've only run across a couple of them, was an interesting start in video games that I don't really think went anywhere, was when they took board games or tactical games that were just amazingly slow, and then put them in video game format, like Starfleet Battles.
Oh, yeah.
If you wanted to have a decent fight between more than one ship on each side in Starfleet Battles, you could be spending 45 or 50 minutes just setting everything up to make one move.
Yeah.
And then the video games came along, you're like, wow, look at that.
Yeah.
I took care of an entire week in like an hour, that's awesome.
We're almost done with our time, but I want to see, do people have any questions? Because we have been barreling along here. Yes.
I'm just sort of curious for Brianna, what's the best example of a game you've seen with bad graphics but good interface and gameplay, and the best of a game with bad graphics but good gameplay, and a game with bad gameplay but good graphics?
For good graphics, just take the last Call of Duty, right? Like very derivative gameplay, gorgeous graphics, great particle effects. I look at the anti-aliasing, dithering, and transparency effects in that game, blows my mind. I would say something like, I'm sorry, I'm not a graphics nerd. I would say something like Peckle. Peckle is a very under-celebrated game. I think it's a perfect game. I think it's a perfect piece of
How do you spell that?
P-E-G-G-L-E.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Like, the graphics are just simple sprites, and the characters in it look freakish, even though it's such a popular game. So,
Parappa the Rappa. People who are younger than the damn game and still go crazy for
It's
it.
a great game. What are you talking about? Chop, chop, chop the X into the bowl.
Exactly.
That's nice.
Threes is a great game that just uses numbers, very much like Sudoku or something like that. But Threes is just about perfect in terms of just a beautiful experience that you can have on your iPhone. So that would be another one. Zero graphics, really, it's just numbers. In fact, I saw a presentation from the designer at a conference where he said he tried to make the graphics better and it ruined the game because it did what you said, where it was like the boot moving, where you slowed down the experience.
Yeah. I look at Peckle too. They tried to really up the graphics, and they didn't pay attention to the gameplay at all. It was a far worse game. Sorry, go ahead.
Good guys from you guys, any suggestions? Okay.
I actually don't play video games as much as I would love to because full-time job and a full-time writer. And every time I played a video game, I lost 8 hours of my life and shit, I can't write that.
This is one reason I play Kingdom of Loathing, because I can only play so many turns and I'm done.
There you go.
There you go.
Right, so I have two comments. First, I wanted to personally thank Mr. Moore. I have been playing White Wolf for 20 years. Some of my best
You're making me
friends,
feel old, though.
and some of my best friends are people who I have started playing White Wolf with.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we have created crossovers, we have created our own worlds in that system. So,
And I think that's all the better. That's what you should be able to do with those things.
right.
Yeah, I'm a world of darkness. Sorry, glows in the dark.
So the question actually, most of the panel had focused on the video games, right? I was mostly interested in the role-playing games, right? Because White Wolf in particular was, at the time when we started looking at it, which was, mid-1990s or something, right? It was unique, right? In the sense that it felt real.
They did everything they could with White Wolf to make sure that that was the case. They wanted a nice, simplistic game system. They gave you the option with like the player's guides to make it more complex. But they also, at the core, you didn't have to worry about anything. You grabbed a handful of the same shape dice, the math was easy, and you made your move.
So it put the emphasis on role play.
Exactly. It was far more important that you had characters that were realistic and that you could do things with. Especially as an example in Vampire, where the Machiavellian maneuvers were just preposterous. And if you didn't do them right, you weren't going to be in that game for very long.
Right. So the question had to do really with the kind of the thought process that went into the design, because that's a very different tack on design for role-playing games than, say, AD&D or something else like that.
Yeah.
So, like, how did you guys go about this? Like, what? It can't be just be playtesting. There has to be a concept stage to this, which is different.
Playtesting was actually a remarkably small part about it. They wanted to make sure that the story ran okay. But the big difference was that with Dungeons and Dragons as an example, normally what you had was, there's a castle over there. It's been abandoned for this many years. You should go in there and see what you can find out. A new evil has come from this castle. Go be heroes. Whereas with the storyteller system, and that's what they called it, the storyteller system, the idea was you were writing an interactive story. So here's your setting. Here are the 75 important characters that are going on in this city right now, and how they relate to each other. Here's the web that will show you how they will react with each other. Now throw your characters in the middle of that and hope you don't die. Because it's, again, the politics in those games was on a level that I don't think had ever been done in any game, period.
Yeah.
And that was 3/4 of the battle. Give people the most immersive experience you can have sitting down at a table across from each other.
And I think those kind of things also played up into the development of live-action role-playing games.
Absolutely they did.
When I started in the days, the mid-'80s, we were doing weekend-long role-playing games, and everybody had their character, and you had...
A little lit figure.
No. And we had the rule of 3 is what we used. You had to have 3 primary and one or 2 secondary goals for this person. And then you said, off you go. I did a game designed on Watergate, where Nixon wound up getting elected for a 3rd term. Because...
Well, a song about never saying never and never being told what you can or cannot do. This is one of us. A 1, 2, 3. To fighting, or when fighting got to me, I looked to find examples on the field of chivalry, and I saw mighty arms, much stronger than my arms could ever be. So I thought perhaps that field was not for me. But still I stayed and watched the fighting till one figure stood apart, in armor newly fashioned and a helm more pot than art. But each blow is thrown with honor and the lightness of the heart. So I took that step which soon became a start. 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fuss, but I remember being proud that she was one of us. And we might never stand together in a shield wall side by side. Because of her I lift my sword with pride. She was ladylike and lively, not the type you would expect, with a braver heart than many and a slot shot to respect. And I guess she'd once decided this was where she'd like to be, and I thought if she could do it, why not me? 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fuss,